This is the model of internal capsule. Internal capsule is a V-shaped gallery-like space through which white fiber of the brain passes, ascending and the descending fibers. This is just the lentiform nucleus, which is made up of two parts. This yellow one is putamen, and under this is the globus pallidus. This one is the globus pallidus, which again divided into globus pallidus externum and the globus pallidus internum. And this is in yellow putamen. Putamen and the globus pallidus all together known as lentiform nucleus. It lies laterally, whereas on the medial aspect, the caudate nucleus and the thalamus. Caudate nucleus, this is a C-shaped structure which is divided into head, body and the tail. And this one is amygdaloid nucleus, which is closely, intimately attached with the tail of the caudate nucleus as well as the lower part of the lentiform nucleus, or you can say lower part of the putamen. The anterior most part of the head is attached with the putamen through this thin grey matter, thin strip of grey matter, in which in between there is spaces through which the fiber passes. These spaces are called fundus striati, and these are the striated structure. That's why caudate nucleus as well as the putamen all together known as corpus striatum. Corpus means body, stratum that is the striated structure, which is shown in this blue color. Okay. Now internal capsule lies in the subcortical area. This is the cerebral hemisphere. If we cut the sagittal section of the cerebral hemisphere, what we see on the medial aspect there is caudate nucleus and the thalamus, and on the lateral aspect there is lentiform nucleus, and in between the gallery-like space V-shaped through which the white fibers, the myelinated fiber, descend and the ascend. It is known as internal capsule. It is divided into anterior limb, which is in between the lentiform nucleus laterally, and the head of the caudate nucleus medially. Genu, which is at the globus tuas, just beneath the globus internum, here in between the globus internum and the thalamus. Here is this part is genu. Okay, and this is the posterior limb, which is situated in between the lentiform nucleus laterally and the thalamus medially. So this is the internal capsule, and posterior to the lentiform nucleus is the retrolentiform part of the internal capsule, and below the lentiform nucleus is the sublentiform part of the internal capsule. Now coming to the fiber which are passing through this internal capsule. First, anterior limb of the internal capsule. The fiber passes is the ascending fiber, this one ascending fiber which is passing through the anterior limb of the internal capsule is the anterior thalamic radiation. anterior thalamic radiation, it starts from the anterior and the medial nuclei of the thalamus going to the prefrontal cortex and the cingulate gyrus. Here lies the cingulate gyrus. Prefrontal cortex and the cingulate gyrus. Prefrontal cortex, we all know, is related with the Osama, CDEF, IJ. Osama in place of AB, अमिताभ बच्चन चला गया, ओसामा आ गया. अमिताभ बच्चन कहाँ चला गया? गर्ल्स हॉस्टल, GH. तो AB और GH नहीं रहेगा. क्या रहेगा? ओसामा, CDEF, GH नहीं रहा, IJ. That is orientation, O for orientation, S for spatial awareness, A for ethical awareness, M for moral awareness, Osama, CD concentration, depth of emotion, ethical awareness, CDEF, intelligence, judgment, foresightedness, F for foresightedness, CDEF, IJ, intelligence and judgment. So if this anterior thalamic radiation, which is going to the prefrontal cortex and the cingulate gyrus, if it is suffered, the perforating artery which is supplying the anterior limb is suffered by the lacunar stroke due to the lipohyalinosis of the perforating arteries, this anterior limb of the internal capsule will be, its function will be impaired. So there will be defect which I have mentioned, the function of prefrontal cortex. And the cingulate gyrus is related with the bed memory, that is the behavior, emotion, drive and the long-term memory. These all are related with the function of the cingulate gyrus. So that will hamper and the patient will lead to BOS, that is the bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and as for schizophrenia. Okay. Now the another fiber which is passing through the anterior limb, the descending fiber, is the frontopontine. This one, this yellow one is the frontopontine, which starts from the frontal lobe and going to the pontine nucleus, pons, frontopontine fiber, this one. Okay. Now coming to the genu, this one is genu, in between the anterior limb and the posterior limb. Here only one fiber is passing. This is the corticonuclear and the or corticobulbar. The previous name was corticobulbar, but today it is known as corticonuclear. It starts from the motor area and the sensory area as well, and then it is going passing through the genu of the internal capsule and then the different nuclei of the brain stem, corticonuclear fiber. Okay, and it is responsible for the swallowing, mastication, facial musculature movement. These are the function of the corticonuclear fiber. It is related with the head and neck muscles, which is derived from the pharyngeal arches. Okay, corticonuclear fiber. Now coming to the posterior limb, is situated in between the lentiform nucleus laterally and the thalamus medially. This green one is the posterior limb fibers. Red one is of genu fiber, yellow one is the anterior limb fiber. One thing I forget to mention, that ascending and descending fiber lies in the anterior limb as well as the transverse fiber. These are the transverse fiber, these two. This transverse fiber, it connects the caudate nucleus with the, this is the first one. So first one is this caudate nucleus with the lentiform nucleus. Okay, both lentiform nucleus. And this one is the corticostriatal fiber, that is from the frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex to the as a whole corpus stratum. Okay, corpus stratum is what? This is corpus stratum is the caudate nucleus plus putamen is known as corpus stratum. Corticostrial fiber as well as the caudate connecting with the putamen. Okay, these two fiber are transversely running fiber which found in the anterior limb. Now coming to the posterior limb, from the anterior 2/3 there are three type of fiber passing through spinal. Okay, so this is the corticospinal and it is going to, here it is forming the pyramidal tract and the lower part of the medulla oblongata it crosses, and this is the major motor decussation. Now this is responsible for the gross motor activity, gross voluntary motor activity, and some fiber crosses and some fiber do not crosses. 90% crosses and 10% do not crosses. Which do not crosses is responsible for the gross motor movement of the axial musculature, and the which crosses going to the periphery. Okay, and that is the limbs. Fiber, it starts from whole of the fiber. It starts from whole of the cerebral cortex. There's a temporal area, temporal lobe, the occipital temporal lobe below, parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. From all these area it is going to the deeper nuclei of the pons, and then it is after crossing it is going to the cerebellum, and it is related with the coordination of the voluntary movements and coordination of also involuntary movements. Okay, now coming to the cortico-rubral fiber. This one is red nucleus, cortico-rubral, this one. This fiber is cortico-rubral, this one. It starts from the premotor area and going to the red nucleus after passing through the anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb of the internal capsule, cortico-rubral, and it is responsible for the extrapyramidal function like the motor skills. The pyramidal tract is for gross motor activity, and the extrapyramidal tract, which is subserved by the cortico-rubral fiber, is responsible for the skills, and this one is corticopontine, which after was going to the cerebellum is responsible for the balance and posture as well as the coordination, and this also deals with the coordination as well as the skills, motor skills, fine motor movements. Okay, now coming to the posterior 1/3 of the posterior limb. This fiber is going, that is the posterior thalamic radiation as well as the superior thalamic radiation. What it does, it carry the somatosensory sensation, that is the pain, touch, temperature, 2-point discrimination, vibration, position sense, conscious proprioception. All these fiber after making sensory decussation, this one is the after making sensory decussation at the upper part of the medulla oblongata. This one is the medulla oblongata. Upper part of the medulla oblongata, it forms major sensory decussation, and now it is going to the Post-central gyrus. Okay, this one. This one is the going to the post-central gyrus. Okay, and responsible for all the sensation. And if there is involvement of this fiber due to the occlusion of the perforating artery, which is going to supply the posterior 1/3 of the posterior capsule, this somatosensory fiber will get hampered, dysfunction, and there will be sensory deficit. Okay, now coming to the retrolentiform. Retrolentiform fiber is the optic radiation which starts from the retina and through it, then it forms the optic tract and going to the lateral geniculate body, and from that lateral geniculate body by the geniculocalcarine tract. This is also known as geniculocalcarine tract or retrolentiform tract, which is going to the calcarine fissure in the occipital lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, this is calcarine fissure, and it is passing through the retro, that is behind, retrolentiform part of the internal capsule, and in gray color. And this blue one is the sublentiform part of the internal capsule through which the auditory fiber passes, auditory radiation. This gray one is the optic radiation and this is the auditory radiation. It is coming through the inferior colliculus and then going to the medial geniculate body, and then from medial geniculate body it is going to the middle temporal gyrus, the Hessel, nucleus of Hessel, HESCHL. Okay, so if there is involvement of this fiber due to the involvement of sublentiform part of the internal capsule due to the involvement of perforating artery, either it may be blocked or due to the embolism or due to the ischemia. In either way, if the perforating artery going to supply the sublentiform, there will be auditory deficit, and in this case there will be visual deficit. So it will lead to homonymous contralateral homonymous hemianopia, and this will lead to the auditory deficit. Okay, and this fiber, the posterior thalamic, if this will get hampered, there will be loss of the sensory deficit, and all these three, this one and this one, will lead to motor deficit. Contralateral hemiplegia and hemiparesis will be there. Okay, and this will lead to hemianesthesia, contralateral hemianesthesia, and corticonuclear going to the same side face, so ipsilateral hemianesthesia. Okay, and the hemiparesis as well. Okay, and this I have already discussed. Now coming to the blood supply of this, the fiber of the anterior limb, genu, and the posterior limb, it is divided into superior part and the inferior part. The superior part of the anterior limb, genu, and the posterior limb all are supplied by the middle cerebral artery, which is the branch lenticulostriate branch of the middle cerebral artery, supply the superior portion of anterior limb, genu, and the posterior limb, whereas the inferior part of the anterior limb is supplied by Huebner artery, Huebner recurrent artery or recurrent Huebner artery, which is the branch of anterior cerebral artery, and the genu lower part is supplied by the perforating branch from the internal carotid artery as well as the anterior choroidal artery. Lower portion of posterior limb is supplied by the anterior perforating branch of the anterior choroidal artery. The retrolentiform and the sublentiform part of the internal capsule again supplied by the anterior choroidal artery. What happens in this perforating artery? If there is constriction of this artery due to the either maybe due to the impaction of embolus, or if there is less blood supply, if there is due to can be hemorrhage, because this perforating artery has got very narrow lumen, and the most common cause of this lumen obstruction is the lipohyalinosis of these perforating arteries. Lipohyalinosis, which will lead to lacunar stroke. This type of stroke in which the perforating arteries is the lacunar stroke, which will lead to the hampering of the function of these fibers which I have discussed. Okay, thank you.